Welcome everybody to the July Boston Tableau User Group / MIT TUG meetup. We're going to get started, everybody. All right. So I'll be quick because we've got two awesome speakers today. So first, after I run through this, we're going to have Roshni Gohil come up and say a little bit about the MIT group. And also with, so our first presenter, we've got Jeremy Blaney and Ace Jalali. They are with Wiiisdom, and they'll be talking about test, promote, and certify at scale. Then we have Branden Kornell. He is going to talk about Future Me, Thanks Me, Tableau tips and tricks for organization and documentation. And we want to give a special thanks to Cleartelligence. They are a local consulting firm. I've had the good fortune of working with them actually for a couple of years. They're a great group if you're looking for anybody. And Jackie and Brian Moore also are members of Cleartelligence. So they help provide the food and refreshments today. All right.
All right, so I'm going to try to make this really quick. There's a QR code on your screen. If you're in the higher ed community, whether in Massachusetts or elsewhere, or know people who are, take a picture of that and go to a slide that looks exactly like this. We've got a few different communities existing in the Mass area for Tableau things. So MIT has a small Tableau user group. We mostly are functioning via Slack. And for the higher education community as a whole, we have a higher education Tableau Slack that is very, very active. I think we have something like 3,000 users, 600-ish institutions across the US, Canada, and even some folks from South Africa, I want to say. We have a higher ed Tableau user group. We meet monthly virtually. If you like dancing in your chair from your desk, that's what we do. And there's also a more local version called the Massachusetts Higher Education Tableau User Group. Has the best acronym of them all, MUG. And we have been virtual for all of the pandemic. We are hoping to have our first in-person event since 2019, I want to say, sometime in the next couple of months. So if you know people who are in the higher ed space who want to present there, or just want to meet other people who are doing similar things in the weird space that is higher ed, please refer them to this. And again, that QR code has all of this on there. And that's it. That was a little less quick than I hoped, but whatever.
Still quicker than me.
Now this is start. There we go.
Not quick anymore. Thank you. So yeah, big thanks to Roshni and MIT. If you're enjoying the space, this is all thanks to her. So we appreciate you helping to coordinate. All right, first up, we have Jeremy and Ace. So Jeremy is a VP of product marketing at Wiiisdom, and Ace is a solutions consultant. And they're going to learn us about test, promote, and certify at scale.
Cool.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much for having us here. I'll mic up here. Let me get a mic. Is this on upside down? Can you all hear me? I'm pretty loud, so I might blow your eardrums out. But hey, thanks so much for having us both to the Boston Tableau user group as well as the MIT Tableau user group. I've personally learned something already as a side hustle. I teach courses on data and analytics at Tufts University, where I went to grad school. And so, oh my gosh, I didn't even know there was a higher ed Tableau user group. That's great. I'm going to be a part of it. And join the Slack community along with 10,000, 40,000 others, however many people are in there. But no, hey, thanks so much for having us. I need to switch slides. Sorry. I get really excited and then I just get going. Yep. See, so many options here. Hold on. Does anybody know any jokes? We're almost there. We're almost there. And we are there. Yeah, there we go. Hey, thanks so much for having us today. My name is Jeremy, and indeed, I'm the VP of Product Marketing at a wonderful company called Wiiisdom. Today, we're going to talk about analytics governance, even AnalyticsOps, something that I'm quite passionate about. But I've been at Wiiisdom for about 3 months now. Prior to this, I was in sort of the data startup scene, moving between a couple of companies. But before that, I spent about 5 years at Tableau. I joined Tableau pre-acquisition when it was just Tableau as a customer success manager. I mean, really working with some of the largest organizations around the world on building and nurturing data cultures. And then my farewell tour was leading a wonderful body of knowledge, which we'll talk about a little bit today, called Tableau Blueprint. I mean, you know, to be successful with data, obviously you need to invest in technology and you need to learn tips and tricks and all that kind of stuff, but you also need to think about governance and data literacy and data culture and all of that other stuff. And that's pretty much what Blueprint is all about. So something I'm quite passionate about, was able to find a wonderful role here at Wiiisdom, sort of evangelizing the same. I'm joined today by my esteemed colleague, Jalali, who has a fun way of describing how to pronounce his last name. Do you need this?
I
You want to whisper into me?
think it'll be okay. Yeah, I think we got this. I'll be a little bit louder. But yeah, my name is Jalali. I'm a solution consultant with the Wiiisdom team. I've been in the analytics world for almost 12 years. I've worked with companies like IBM, Cognos partners, and 5 years with the Tableau team and the professional services team. My role is pretty hands-on. I work with the customers on their most complex challenges, trying to figure out ways to integrate our tools within their more challenging environments. And I'm excited to talk to you about Wiiisdom, what we've been up to, and show you a little bit about what it looks like and what it feels like under the hood. So very excited to be here.
Our session is going to be pretty high on like thought leadership stuff and pretty low on vendor stuff, because I think it's important that everybody take what we're talking about and implementing it within their organization. Obviously, we'll talk to you about what we do and we can have a conversation about that. But anyways, let's keep it interactive. If you have questions or thoughts or whatever throughout, feel free to raise your hand and ask away. I've got a lot of energy, had a lot of caffeine today. And so, you know, again, like if you're not interacting with me, then I don't know, then who knows where this will go. But anyway, so let's get started. So for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to really discuss a series of problems that all of us have suffered from for far too long, right? We're going to talk about the problem of missed errors in Tableau dashboards. We're going to talk about the problem of not having enough time to thoroughly test dashboards to catch those errors before they become, you know, risks and costly mistakes for your organization. And then we're also going to talk about the problem of the Wild West, right? How do you know of all of that content that lives in your Tableau server or your Tableau cloud, what data sources and dashboards are, you know, accurate, reliable, and therefore good to go for decision making? This isn't just going to be a commiseration session, though it is going to be a little bit of that. So participation is important. We're going to talk about solutions, right? Including how to automate Tableau and BI testing, and also how to streamline sort of that analytics governance workflow overall, which we'll talk about here in just a second. The spoiler alert is it has everything to do with this emerging methodology called AnalyticsOps. We've heard of data ops, DevOps, ML ops, AI ops. There are all the ops right now. We're going to focus in on analytics ops. Cool? Sound good? Interesting? Hopefully, because if not, you're stuck with it for the next 30 minutes or so. But without further ado, guys, let's jump into it, beginning with a few thoughts on testing and Tableau content validation. So testing stuff, right? To go way back, testing stuff is a part of who we are. As children, we learned about the world by dipping our toes into the proverbial water. Is it hot? Is it cold? Should I be a part of this or should I not, right? We always tested something out before we jumped into that new experience or new situation. We asked similar questions as adults. I love wine tasting. I lived in Northern California for a number of years. When I was in the Air Force, I was in the Air Force for like a decade. You know, I love wine tasting, and I'm sure many of you do as well. You go to the bar, they put a little bit of wine in your cup, and you sort of look at it goofily under the lights, and you're like, oh, it tastes like blueberry and blackberry, right? What we're doing there is we're tasting the wine. We're testing the wine to see if we like it. And if you do, you buy a bottle or 12 or cases if you're super wealthy and, you know, a little bit of an alcoholic. But yeah, I mean, like we test wine. This makes me sad. Maybe not sad so much as it does like exhausted from what we lived with over the past couple of years. As a people, right? Testing was a big part of who we were over the past couple of years. Before every conference you attended or building that you went into, whether it was a workplace or a school place, oftentimes you had to get tested, right? You had to take that sort of like Q-tip brain tickle test, and it was very uncomfortable, but you ultimately did it because we all wanted to keep each other safe. We wanted to slow the spread of the virus and so on and so forth. And then as professionals, testing stuff is a part of who we are, right? As data and analytics professionals, we want to know with absolute certainty that our data sources and that our dashboards are 100% accurate and therefore completely reliable for decision making, right? Our stakeholders, the people that we're working with, they expect nothing less because they're using all of this content, all of these assets to make decisions, to take action, to drive business value, right? The stakes are really, really, really high. And so we hold ourselves and each other accountable for delivering perfection, right? The problem is, the problem is perfection is just really, really, really hard to achieve. Do you want to do this? Should we do the lapel thing?
You can go for it.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. It's sort of weird because we only have one lapel. And so we have this cute little dance set up and then we're like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Do you want to do it? Do it. I don't want to steal your thunder. Here, I'm just going to do this.
Okay, don't look at it.
I don't
Hear me,
really
okay?
know what to do here. What do I do? I just do
So,
this.
yeah. Not distract me.
This,
I can
this
take
user group is so much fun.
Okay, just a moment.
Hopefully everybody's having fun. You're not like, oh my
Yep.
God, what is
Hear
this
me, okay?
clown show?
That's better. I think this is better.
Next time we won't get two mics. We'll just keep it at one.
Yeah, I think
better.
this is important. I think this is part of the whole experience, yeah. But yeah, just Jeremy was mentioning, perfection is very hard to achieve, and there's a lot of things that have to happen for us to be able to get there, right? So to be able to say a dashboard is 100% accurate, we have to test for a series of different things. First and foremost, you have to test for the accuracy of the data, right? And that can mean different things. You might change the filters, change the parameters and everything. Every time you interact with the dashboard, you want to make sure that data is validated, it's 100% accurate. Second, you need to run user experience tests. You need to make sure those parameters, those filters, those actions are actually working the way you expected them to, right? Because it's important that this journey is validated from all ends. Security is also important because I don't really have to get too detailed on it, right? I think we all know why security is very important for all the obvious reasons. But what about performance? If your dashboard has the correct data and it is operational, but the performance is not great, chances are your audience might not use it as often as they probably should, right? So it's very important to be able to test for that as well. Stress testing, admins really like this one because it's important to be able to test your environment to ensure that it is potentially able to take all the pressure that comes at it at any given time. So that's just another way of testing things, and as we see it. Lastly is the regression tests. So what does your dashboard look like in its current state as opposed to the state in a previous time? Or when you move it from one environment to another during a migration, during a deployment, is it working as expected, or are there anything inconsistent with the experience that you've seen in the past there? So let's see. So to say that testing has to happen all day, every day, it's not hyperbolic, right? Because this is part of the production cadence that we all follow. Your user experience, your accuracy, your security, performance, stress testing, everything that we talked about right now is something that should be part of your entire production process. It's part of the day-to-day job. So it needs to happen every day. It has to happen all the time. But this stuff also happens in the context of strategic deployment, right? With things like database migrations, with cloud migrations, with Tableau upgrades, any kind of ongoing maintenance that you might have. This is all going to be part of that experience also. You weren't supposed to lose access to that dashboard that you did, but for some reason it happens because the testing didn't take place and now you've lost the access to that dashboard.
Yeah, I'm passing it back.
Very smooth transition.
Yeah, very smooth transition. Would have been good with like a handheld. But I mean, speaking of outages, like Ace just said, let's talk about just the risks of not running tests for these various scenarios, right? Operationally, I think many of us have been in a situation where an upgrade or a database migration took place. And everything should have gone just fine. You should have been able to re-access your content on Monday when you first came in and logged in, but that didn't happen, right? Suddenly nobody could access any of their content. And now there's a 5-alarm fire, not just in one business unit, but all of the business units that have access to this particular stuff. Financial and compliance risks. All you need to do is go to Google and type in calculation errors as it relates to Excel in particular, and you'll land on just a countless number of stories about how the smallest errors led to very big losses for organizations because that logic was baked sort of deep within. People didn't know it was an error until it was too late. Reputational, and maybe I'd ask for somebody to respond to this, or at least raise your hand if you've experienced this. How many of you have pushed a dashboard to one of your business partners or a stakeholders that mistakenly contained an error or two? Has anybody been in that situation? I think everybody's been in that situation, right? And sometimes your stakeholder or business partner or boss or whoever sees it and they're like, hey, I saw this, can you please fix that? And they're like, yeah, my bad, I'll fix it. You fix it. That happens again and again and again. It starts to destroy like your reputation as an individual who delivers very trusted results, but also your reputation as an analyst, right? And then what about opportunity, cost, and trust? In 2021, Gartner put out this study that basically said that on average, organizations are investing about 10% of their revenue on data and analytics initiatives. That's a lot of money, right? When people are repeatedly exposed to and burned by all of these different risks, again, reputational, financial, compliance, and so on and so forth, they go back to doing things the old way, right? They act counter to what those investments are supposed to deliver. They adopt old behaviors. They reestablish data silos. They start to rely on data downloads for reporting and decision-making. And this further increases the risk exposure of organizations. And so what you end up with is this vicious cycle of we don't trust what's happening because we've been burned by these risks. And because we're adopting old behavior, then we're creating an environment in which these risks can continue to breed. And now we don't trust. And again, it's just a bad cycle, right? From which escaping is very difficult. So validation is obviously important, but it's insufficient in and of itself. Tableau Blueprint, as I mentioned, I used to lead Tableau Blueprint at Tableau, funny enough. I love Tableau Blueprint. I honestly think it's a wonderful body of work because it provides this roadmap for organizations, not just to expand, but to optimize their use of data, right? It's filled to the brim with processes and best practices related to strategy work, related to stuff like data literacy, governance, and so much more. Are people big on Tableau Blueprint? Have people heard of Tableau Blueprint? Probably, right? Yeah, cool. Very cool. There's a section on content governance that I'm particularly fond of because it specifically addresses the problems that we're talking about here, right? Blueprint states that validation is really, really, really important for all the reasons that we mentioned previously, but it must be followed by promotion and certification. Promotion refers to basically the tasks that you take to move that fully validated content to another location, like a production project in the event that you're deployed on Tableau Cloud, you only have one site, or maybe to a totally another site in the event that you are deployed on Tableau server, right? The reason that you're doing this is because you want to keep that in progress stuff, the stuff that you're working on, and that fully validated stuff separate from each other. You don't want stakeholders relying on that in progress, that half-baked stuff for decision-making because it may be complete, it may not be complete, it may be true, it may not be true, it's in progress, right? You don't want people using that stuff for decision-making. And then certification. Certification refers to the boxes that you check so that way your stakeholders know of all of that content that lives in that production project or production site, which content is not only accurate, but is also recent and therefore reliable for decision-making. I always say that BI content is a little like bread, right? It can go stale. Circumstances change, questions change, requirements change, things change. And without certification, it's very difficult to know what production content is good to go. Now, Tableau obviously offers really great features in terms of data source certification, maybe stuff coming around dashboard certification. I think that's a conversation for another time. So in sum, here's what you have, right? You're walking through this process in order to get stuff from A to B. Before you develop a dashboard, you collect requirements during validation, you test your dashboard to ensure that basically all these requirements have been met. Yep, it's fully accurate, like Ace was saying, it's delivering a positive user experience. Everybody who should see data sees data, it's secure, it's performant, blah, blah, blah. Then you promote it to a production project. Maybe once you get there, you've got to swap out data sources just because of how things are in your organization. So you do like a revalidation, then finally you certify it and you release it to your stakeholders. It sounds pretty simple, but here's the reality of things. Time is precious, especially for analysts, business analysts, dashboard developers. Excuse me, I shouldn't have got the spicy rap. I don't know. I mean, time is precious, especially for those analysts who are just inundated with requests for help. There's not enough hours to keep up with, the backlog of asks while also ensuring that content is fully validated and governed. And so what happens? People skip steps, right? They don't have time to complete validation. They don't have time to test the dashboard for, accuracy and performance. We all need to get that content into the hands of our stakeholders as fast as practically possible. And so we either skip validation in some of these steps entirely, or maybe in large part doing spot checks only. Certification also skipped, right? Now stakeholders have no way of knowing of all of that content, which is accurate, recent, and reliable. It's really on them to figure it out themselves. And what happens when we skip steps? We covered this already. We increase the risk exposure for the organization across all of those different categories like financial, reputational, and so on and so forth. Does this resonate with people? I mean, do you find yourself sort of crunched for time and racing through these steps? Yeah, every day, all day. Well, we've got a solution for that. But the situation gets worse before we come to the solution. So here we were talking about the development process, right? The pain associated with all of that. Now let's talk about what content looks like once it's in production. Actually, I wish, oh wait, man, I'm like resisting the urge to be the professorial Blaney that I am. I was going to do like the math equation. I mean, let's just put some numbers to it. Let's say you build like 5 dashboards a week for a series of 4 weeks. That's public math, right? 4 times 4, 16. Did I say 5 weeks? 5 weeks. So, okay, 20 dashboards. So now, boy, who allowed this guy to work at Tufts? Not MIT, Zing, zing to my employer. But anyways, so 20 dashboards are produced over the course of 5 weeks, right? 20 dashboards living on production that honestly you should be watching in an ongoing basis, because there are a number of things that could happen that could cause that dashboard to break. Here you've got sort of like the process that data goes through to get from A to B, starting with collection and then moving to storage and so on and so forth. At the storage layer, column names shouldn't change, data types shouldn't change, but they do, right? And when they do, that perpetuates down to your Tableau dashboards and stuff breaks. And then you get an angry message via Slack saying, hey, why did this break? At the processing level, let's say you're using Prep or Alteryx or something, or even in DB, something like DBT to get stuff from A to B and to manipulate it to suit your business requirements. ETL processes fail out, extract refreshes fail out. And now somebody wants to know, hey, why don't I have the latest data in my dashboard? Like things should have refreshed yesterday, but I've got last week's information. And then what about the consumption layer? We talked about sort of the Wild West already, but again, a lot of content out there. I see similarly titled things, which is the source of truth? And then outdated analyses. I mean, how many people have gone onto their Tableau server, Tableau cloud, and went to go use a dashboard for decision-making, only realizing like, this no longer applies. Like this should have been archived 3 months ago or something like that, right? So what are we to do? Are we just to accept that like risks are this untouchable thing? No. At Wiiisdom, we've worked with, just countless organizations to eliminate their risk exposure by doing what we're talking about today, right? By testing, promoting, and certifying BI content, being Tableau dashboards and Tableau data sources at scale. Let's talk about just the data value wheel for a quick second more. So to produce business value, data needs to move through all those different stages, right? On paper, this obviously looks so simple. Move your data from A to B to C, bing, bing, boom. Pretty simple. Each step in this process is an aggregate of many, many, many little steps. And without governance, these many little steps can become big problems for organizations. And that's why, at least related to this processing step, that's why stuff like data ops exists, right? Data ops really just aims to improve data reliability and its integrity, right, through the orchestration and the automation of data integration and processing pipelines and so on and so forth. But do you ever notice that when people talk about data ops, they refer to it as a practice that almost like starts and ends before anything analytics begins? In other words, like data ops doesn't extend into the world of Tableau. It ends with Snowflake or Databricks or whatever. That's always felt a little insufficient to me, especially when you consider there's a whole series of things that happen after that point, right? Like I said previously, data undergoes a bit more transformation to meet the needs of the business. People create calculations in Tableau and so on and so forth. That ultimately is where this beautiful idea of like analytics ops fits in. Analytics ops, like I said previously, it's this emerging methodology that applies principles from DevOps, from data ops, from ML ops, from all of these different ops to the cycle of analysis and that, consumption layer with a focus on not animation, but automation rather. Analytics ops is very much designed to build trust in data and analytics and increase confidence in data-driven decision-making by streamlining what I talked about previously, the development, the testing, the deployment, and those monitoring processes for analytics. And then obviously I talked about the point around automation. So now I go on for a really long time talking about this, but obviously I don't believe that's the best way to learn. And so my good friend Ace here and I are going to show you just sort of what this looks like in practice through a little bit of a story and a little bit of a demo. So here, I want you to meet my good friend Ace. Ace is a Tableau content creator. He's a Tableau dashboard developer. He's a business analyst. There's so many different titles out there right now, right? He's loved by everybody in the organization because he's known for producing just beautiful analytics and reports that are, again, beautiful, but also very reliable. Ace's validation workflows look very similar to our own. He builds stuff, and then he passes it along to a peer who helps him spot check it for errors. From there, he passes that dashboard maybe to like a data steward or another person in the organization who publishes that dashboard to that production project. Revalidation doesn't occur because there's just not enough time. One day, Ace gets a note from his boss. The organization is doing a little bit of restructuring. And from now on, Ace is going to be all on his own, right? He needs to manage this workflow by himself. Ace is really frustrated. He's done what we all do. He starts to type like this angry message back to his boss, and then like backspace. Then he types it again, and he backspace, and he decides to just like avoid words altogether and just give a thumbs up emoji, which is kind of like, in some circumstances, sort of like the polite middle finger emoji, but whatever, you do it. He's frustrated. More work is never a good thing. He starts, to do what I just said, and then he thinks better of it. What's done is done. Thumbs up emoji. It's time to move on. This obviously goes fine for a little while, but eventually the workload just becomes too much, right? He does what I said previously, what we've all done. He decides to skip steps because he has just too much to deliver and there aren't enough hours in the day. Well, as you can imagine, after a while, things start to go wrong, right? Ace's stakeholders start to, message him in Slack about broken data sources and mismatched numbers and vises that don't quite look right. I'm sure every one of us in this room has received Slack messages like this, probably on a weekly or every other week basis, right? It happens again and again and again, creating those trust issues like I was talking about previously. And what happens when those trust issues become really big issues? adoption begins to fall, right? He sees that people aren't using his content. They're actively turning away and relying on data downloads for decision-making. This is like a knife through Ace's heart. He's got it. So one day, Ace's boss asked him to come by the office. He's like, hey, I really appreciate how you turned around this dashboard last week, but there's just one small issues. When I showed it to my boss, we discovered that there were some errors in the numbers. I can't begin to tell you how embarrassing this was for me, Ace. We worked so hard to build, this place into a data-driven organization, but mistakes like these destroy trust. And so Ace is just like heartbroken, again, knife through the heart. It's terrible. He's fed up. He needs to find a better way. And so he does what we all do when we're in the middle of a quintessential crisis. He turns to Google, maybe not Google anymore. Maybe now it's Bard or, ChatGPT or whatever. It's probably ChatGPT, to be honest. But anyways, he turns to, this is like pre-ChatGPT. He turns to his old friend Google and he searched for like a string of words that have something to do with this problem. He types like Tableau, testing, analytics, governance, operations, blah, 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 blah. And one of the top search results ends up being this wonderful thing called Wiiisdom. So Ace clicks on it, learns that there is a company that has basically been tackling this issue for 10 plus years. Here at Wiiisdom, like I said previously, we've been helping customers build trust in analytics and increase confidence in data-driven decision-making by streamlining all that stuff that I talked about previously. He learns that they're not just delivering AnalyticsOps for Tableau, but they're also doing it for Power BI, SAP Business Objects. That's cool because he's a Tableau developer, but there's some other BUs in his organization that are doing stuff with Power BI. But it is what it is, right? So digs a little deeper, loves what he's seeing, learns how WiiisdomOps automates Tableau testing, streamlines that analytics governance workflow that we talked about previously. Actually, I'm not going to talk about. I've been talking a lot. I cut out some of Ace's slides just because it was weird. I was supposed to give it back to him and I didn't because I'm rude like that. Why did I just turn it over to you? You do it. You do it. You want to go in?
Yeah.
You want to do a demo?
All
right, let's do that.
I just want to see if anyone has any thoughts or questions before we jump in.
If we can find the demo. Where'd we go? Oh, no, it's over here. Sorry. Some screens. Cool. You want to do this now?
Okay, great. Yes, let's do the smooth transition. Very nice.
I'm gonna drink more water.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to be showing you a little bit more about the actual tool itself and what it looks like under the hood and how it operates and everything. But before I do that, I just want to emphasize on a couple of things that Jeremy was mentioning that I resonate personally from an analytics point of view. The points where when you do when the dashboard doesn't get enough time for testing and it gets promoted from production and in front of the stakeholders without enough testing. I've personally done that enough times to kind of resonate with it. And here I want to show you what we do with with Wiiisdom, where it essentially does everything that I did from an analyst point of view, again, from a QA side, which was I would open up a dashboard and I would go through a series of different tasks, whether it's just checking the filters, making sure the filters are working, making sure the values in the filters are actually representation of what is supposed to be there. Maybe I have a dimensional value where there's 15 values in my database, but I only need 4 of them, or those 4 values accurate. So a lot of tasks that are simple in many ways, but very manual. And every time there was a dashboard deployment, we'd have to run through all of those tasks. So now looking at the tool itself, what we see on the left side is essentially a list of all the tests that I've created for myself, right? A number of different tests that we have here, and we have a series of different tests that we can choose from. But in my first example, I just want to show you how it really works from someone who's creating this. So the very first task that we see here is an open viz, which navigates to that specific area in your Tableau environment, whether it's Tableau Cloud or your server environment, and it shows you your projects, but based on the permissions that you have from your user and your governance at your organization. So you navigate to that specific viz because that's the very first step of your user experience, opening up a visualization. Next, I have a task that goes through the filters that I have there. Now, if you are familiar with Superstore data, some of these names will be familiar to you. In this case, what we're looking at is the segment filter, and I'm just asking Wiiisdom to go in and select only these two specific values, in this case, consumer and corporate. My next task, and this task list essentially runs sequentially once we run everything. My next task is similar. I'm doing the same thing for a different filter. Again, something that I was doing manually, and this process is essentially recreating that entire user experience. Same thing for a filter for my year, and I also have the option to choose or select a specific mark on my chart and switch tab, or really any series of number of different tasks that we have available. So these task lists are essentially made up of all the native functionalities that you see on Tableau, whether it's a date range, parameters, or selecting marks, and everything that we just saw there. And actually, if some of the folks here remember Tableau from back when button didn't exist, and we would create our own ad hoc buttons, for those very ad hoc situations, we also have a task, the Drive browser. So really, anything that's on your HTML webpage, you can find a way to interact with it on this side. So what I'm doing is I'm replicating that entire user experience that I need to dedicate to my environment, and making sure that when I run this test, it's essentially doing everything that I was doing for that dashboard. And instead of taking my time every time the dashboard is developed, I create this and I let it run either like this manually, or optimally, you would automate this process, have it run maybe sometime before your stakeholders are in, maybe right after your databases are refreshed, whatever makes sense from your end of governance strategy. So what happens is essentially Tableau opens up, and it's taking a little bit of time here. I'm wondering if it's a connection issue. Yeah.
While that's running, I'll just tell a quick story. I got my start with Tableau when I was an analyst in HR analytics at Bank of America. And I was specifically in charge of diversity and inclusion analytics. And I would build these dashboards that had just a ton of filters. And, you know, basically what I need to do as a part of my monthly production cycle is combine these different values from these different filters, validating that like something popped up. I didn't even care about the accuracy of the number. I was like, I just want to deliver a positive user experience. I want something to pop up. And so I would click a filter, check, click a filter, and I would go through those combinations. It just took so long. Like that's effectively what's happening here in slow motion, because we're on the GASP Wi-Fi. I'm going to blame it on my team. Didn't have that tough, but no, it's totally joking.
Yeah, exactly. So
but it's
all the tasks that we were running manually, you can run up to however many. Sometimes you have 15 filters. Yeah. You probably shouldn't have 15 filters, right? But every now and then, when there's situations where you have to go manually through all those steps, you just replicate that and essentially automate that process. And this is just a small portion of how we do QA, right? Because QAing like this is really all about the functionality. But when it comes to QAing for the data, we also have tasks like assert data rule that I'd like to show you a little bit about what that looks like. Essentially, you might know exactly what your data is supposed to look like in terms of what range it needs to be in, right? For example, a year is a great field. Year, because we have historic data and we don't want every year to essentially be part of that data source. So my very first task is confirming that the years in my data are greater than 2017 in this example. So you can define that for yourself. The very first task is checking for that. Now we can also do the same thing for our dimensional values. We can see if those specific dimensional values exist within our Tableau environment. In this case, I'm using a regular expression and I'm checking if my region includes those 3 values, and you can add as many number of values as you'd like. My personal favorite way of checking for the data is the formula, because this way I have the option to writing my own custom formulas based on all the functions that are available on Wiiisdom, which are pretty much the global kind of functions that we're used to seeing on a lot of different tools as well. You can click on them and get the syntax for them and see things like that. Now, what's important here is once these tasks run, I'd like to know a summary of what happened. Did this task run successfully or did it fail? And if there were any areas that we have to put a lot more focus on. So for that, we have the reports tab, which essentially shows me the archive of all the tests that ran throughout the history of opening up this tool. And when I click on it, I can see this report that is essentially telling me of these tasks that ran, how many of them ran successfully, how long did it take for them to run? And if there were any issues, I'm able to navigate more closely to those areas. So for example, in my assert data rule for my region, where I defined 3 values, it looks like there's a partial success. So I can click on this and be navigated to the part of the report where it tells me, actually at that state of the dashboard, as I can see on the screenshot also, those 3 values do exist, but the value West also is found in my Tableau. So this is important for me because maybe I forgot to add it in my expression, or more importantly, maybe this is not supposed to be on the Tableau, right? And that's what we're really looking for. Those areas where things are falling through because of a number of reasons, right? Because like Jeremy mentioned, the database can be changed, the data fields can change, the data types for some reason may change, and it can be sometimes 2 weeks before your business comes to you and tells you, hey, what is going on here? With a tool like this, you can create an automated process where it's capturing all of this, and you can have all sorts of different integrations so that you're notified, whether with your email, with Slack, or with any type of webhooks to be notified with every test that's running. So we'll be always on top of all of that. Now, I want to take a pause here and really open it up to you and see from the analysts in the room or anyone who's had experience with any sort of QA, is this resonating? Have you had any experience with the fields that maybe have missed or anything? Yeah, I can see some nods here. Okay, yeah, all right, great. I'm glad this is resonating because, like I said, I'm at fault a lot in this portion. Now, there's a number of different tasks here, and I'd love to show you all of them. But because of time, I'd love to just show you one more of my favorite parts, which is the assert SQL. This becomes more in those types of tests where you're looking at your front end Tableau dashboard and you're looking at your back end, and you want to make sure that data is actually matching one-to-one, right? So for that, you can establish a connection with your SQL database or any database as a matter of fact, because you can create a JDBC connection with that database, give the username and password, essentially write a query that is now comparing the result of this query from your back end to your front end. So you can really take a closer look at what is happening on your front and back and be sure that everything is as expected. Right? Now, I've talked a lot about this type of test that we call functional tests, which is one of the 3 tests that we run. So we have the functional test, we have the regression test, and we have the performance. Of the regression, we also do cross-environment. So those tests where you have a dashboard in one project and you're deploying it to another project, let's say from UAT to prod, and you want to make sure nothing is breaking as you're making all that move. So I'd love to show you what the regression side looks also. From a regression standpoint, you can either run the regression based on the same dashboard. So I can run it based on what the dashboard looks like right now compared to maybe yesterday or compared to last week or the month before. But there's also the cross-environment regression test where it looks at the same dashboard in 2 different environments. So you can define your source environment and your target environment. And what you need to do is just navigate to those 2 specific areas and specify where this dashboard is sitting. Run the test based on a series of different parameters that we see here. So you can do an image-to-image search. So it immediately tells you what areas of the dashboard might be different. Or you can do a test by the data. Right now, I have everything checkpoint, so I really want to test for all of the values and every parameter that we have set here. But this is great for those cases where you've opened up 2 dashboards on 2 separate screens, and you're just navigating with your human eyes to kind of find those issues, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of human error. As your number of dashboards increase, there's a number of different dashboards that you have to test for. And if you want to do this at a regular cadence and it's falling behind, you're going to end up getting that Slack message that I got from my boss earlier. So here we see at the report level of it, it's showing me immediately what areas of the dashboard are having some issues from the image-to-image side. It looks like I missed quite a bit in this case because there's quite a lot of red marks here. So from just looking at this side, I can see the numbers are different. There's additional charts that are added. The pixels have moved a lot, but it's also telling me in more detail exactly what areas to focus on. There's some summary data differences that I might need to reach out to my data team and see what happened with the data source. There's some development changes here that I can see there's an additional bar chart added. So maybe I need to talk to the analysts, to the developers, and understanding, was the right dashboard indeed moved to the right place? And there's also filter values and things like that that I can identify in this case. So in this case, there's quite a lot of errors. But in those cases where you might have just one KPI that's different than what it's supposed to be, all it's showing is just a red mark around that area, the numbers, and you can really navigate more closely to that area. So just want to take a pause here and let all of this kind of marinate, ask if there's any of this kind of resonating. And I don't know, do we have more time for more tests or?
Probably not.
Good?
No more tests. I think we
Great.
can map.
Cool. So this was a quick demo of what we do. I'd love to jump deeper into and really show you all the different types of tests that we have, but it looks like we're getting close to our time here.
Yeah, I think, just to sum it up wherever this is, we're not going to go through this entire thing, but long story short, connect to Tableau Cloud, Tableau server, as well as your underlying data source, run a bunch of tests for a lot of different scenarios. You're testing for accuracy, user experience, blah, 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 and supporting, a number of different scenarios like standard and ongoing reporting and analytics, as well as these like strategic IT initiatives, like a database migration or whatever. And then in the back end, after that test is done, promote it to a place. After it's in that place, we certify it. We take those test results, store them in Postgres as well as on your computer in the event that you are scheduling those tests, so that way you can stay ahead of those errors in production or potential issues in production. You can set up notifications with Slack and Teams and different things, so that way you're notified of it and you can take action on it before your boss or stakeholder finds out about it. And then if you have sort of adopted data ops, DevOps, and are doing some more advanced stuff, we can obviously integrate into those CI/CD pipelines. So yeah, that's just a little story about us and who we are. I always conclude the presentation with this. If you're going to take nothing else from this presentation, it's to do this stuff. Implement validation processes in your organization, even if it's a buddy check system. Find a way to take that in progress stuff and separate it from the really trusted, valid stuff by moving it to another place. Promote it, right? And then finally, find a way to denote the, stuff that's really accurate and ready to go. Again, the recent stuff from the not so recent stuff through certification. Do that. And then when the manual work around all of that stuff just becomes too much to bear, then give us a call and we're happy to help you figure out how you could adopt Wiiisdom within your organization. So I don't know if we have time for Q&A or if we should move on. We'll be here afterwards, so we can do it after too.
Yeah.
Move on.
One or two questions.
One or two questions. We had 40 in New York. It was crazy. We don't got time for that. We got tips and tricks.
Can we take the mic over or no?
Oh, yeah. Yes, please go ahead.
Please.
Functional test?
Yeah.
What are the types of things that you request for? How do you catch the stuff?
Just to repeat your question, for the functional test, what are the types of tests that we have? What are we usually looking for? Is that the question?
Yeah, and then more importantly, how do you catch the exceptions? It looks like it's screen automation.
Great question. Yeah, so a number of different ways, right? Because for functional tests, what we're testing is one, is your dashboard working the way you expected it? For example, are those filter values there the way as expected? And are they actually filtering the visualizations that they're supposed to? Are the parameters doing what they're supposed to? So you define the value for all these filters and parameters, and Wiiisdom will tell you whether or not that action is taking place in the expected way or not. That's one way. The other way is the assert data, which is really just checking if your data is within a certain range. And if it's not, it'll tell you it's not in that range, right? It'll error out, or it might give you that partial success that we took a quick look at it. So maybe in my dimensional filters, I am specifying 3 values and 4 values are being represented on my Tableau side, right?
So the first time is if you say I'm going to change this filter, is it just looking to see if the screen changes?
Exactly. Yeah, so the test that we had running on the screen earlier essentially does that. We set a number of different filters, specific values. And essentially what Wiiisdom does is opens up Tableau on that environment and runs through all those values within that dashboard. And you can actually physically see it on their screen happening. So all those actions are happening. And for every task, it will have a screenshot of the state of the dashboard. So your report will actually show you exactly what the dashboard looks like at that time.
So none of this is being sent to like Wiiisdom land. All of this is being done locally, like within your environment.
Exactly. Great question. Does that answer everything? Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
the screenshots that.
Definitely. Yeah. Everything has a screenshot. You'll have an archive of reports, and you can always go back to the different series of them.
Okay, one more question.
One more.
All right, we'll be around
Yeah.
afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Branden is the co-founder of
BKSG.
yeah, say it again, please.
BKSG.
BKSG Consulting. He is a MBA grad from EU.
All right. Thanks for having me today. Am I good? All right. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for having me here today. My name is Branden Kornell. I'm a principal at BKSG Consulting. And my presentation today is called Future Me Thanks Me. Some Tableau tips and tricks for organization and doing documentation inside of your workbooks. I decided to call it Future Me Thanks Me, basically based on a song. This is a band out of New Zealand called the Beths, and they sing a song called Future Me Hates Me, which is all about doing something, making a decision, knowing that you are going to regret it down the line. I've certainly been there in my personal life, but also in my work life. A lot of times when you're under deadline, you cut corners, you know it's going to come back and bite you, and it does. But as I was thinking about that, I also got to thinking about all the times that I had done things that were little tweaks, little helps to myself, that down the line, I kind of patted myself on the back and said, hey, that was really smart of me at the time. So this is me. I'm a principal at BKSG Consulting. I started working with Tableau in 2010 with Tableau Public and just honestly fell in love with it. Got my first Tableau job a couple of years later and really never looked back. As John mentioned, I come from the business side, not the IT side, though I've certainly picked up some good programming and server admin stuff. My contact information is here. If you're here, then you are part of the Boston data community. Please do link in with me. I use LinkedIn a lot. I do post a lot of Tableau tips and tricks, as well as general career development stuff, analytics stuff. So come find me on LinkedIn. And in my personal life, as you can tell, I'm a big music fan. I've been out to a couple of concerts and festivals this summer already. This is my company, BKSG Consulting. I started it with my partner, Simona Gokin, last fall. Simona's here today. We specialize in analytics for the biotech, pharmaceutical, and healthcare industries. My background is Tableau and the business side of analytics. Simona is a career scientist, and her background is really in scientific data systems. So if you're interested in analytics, dashboard development, data viz training, please look us up. We're BKSG Consulting. That's BK Branden Kornell, SG Simona Gokin. So this is what I'm going to cover today. I am going to talk about why we're helping out Future Me. I'm going to speak a little bit about the data viz principles that are behind what we're doing. And then I'm going to do tips and tricks in two different sections. One is for documentation purposes, and the other is just to help your workflow out. Just things to keep in mind. Today, this is all for you as developers. Pretty much everything we do say is going to be invisible to the end user. A lot of it is beginner level. It's functionality that you may not use or you may not be aware of. A couple of them are intermediate hacks, but they're very simple. Incidentally, some of these hacks I saw a few years ago. I don't remember who first invented them. So if you know who invented them, please let me know or shout them out, and I will absolutely add them to the presentation. And finally, this is just a toolbox. You don't have to use every trick. You don't have to document everything in every way. Pull something out whenever you need it. All right, so these are the three future me's that I think of. There is me when I am initially developing a workbook. This is when maybe I find myself repeating the same steps over and over. Maybe I find myself getting confused, losing track of my calculations or my worksheets and constantly battling with my workbook. So You just want to take a few small steps to simplify that workflow. Then there's me kind of 6 months down the line. This is when somebody calls me up and says, hey, can you enhance this workbook? And the truth is, like most of you, I probably work on a lot of different stuff. You do too. If I look at a workbook 6 months from now, I may not remember exactly what the data looks like or what exact hack I used. So, I want to save myself some trouble. And then finally, there's not me. There is the world of your teammates. We want to build strong analytics teams. We want to build teams where you're not a one-person shop. The truth of the matter is, in 3 months, 6 months, you may be working on other things. Your role may have changed. You may be less hands-on. The opposite is true. Somebody else's workbook may come to you. People don't talk about it much, but you may not be at the organization anymore. So really, if you implement some of these tips and tricks, you'll be everybody's favorite coworker, or if you're not there anymore, you'll be their favorite business contact. All right, so I'll start with tips and tricks. These are for doing some documentation in your workbook. It's great if your organization does really, really good documentation. You put together a Word doc or a wiki, but the truth of the matter is a lot of times that gets stashed away, in a share file somewhere or on a wiki, doesn't get updated very much. So, these are tricks to put hints inside your workbook and really save yourself an hour of trying to go out and find that documentation. Few things to think about as we're doing this. In data viz, we talk about data viz principles and pre-attentive attributes. So these are things that your visual cortex is attentive to and registers before your conscious brain kicks in. And as we look at these, keep in mind, they're not just for your audience, they're not just for your users. You can use these yourselves as developers. So for example, you notice things that are grouped together. If you're going to put a hint, try and get it as close to the thing it's commenting on as possible. We see size, make your hint nice and big. And finally, if you have the option of using color and it's important or it's a big hazard, make it red. The other thing I want to point out is if you're working in English, most English speakers read from top to bottom and left to right. So when we scan a page, we kind of start up here, read to the right, and scan down. This is why when you build a dashboard, the most important stuff is kind of at the upper left. The least important stuff is down at the lower right. So again, as a developer, if you are putting a hint in, get it up top, get it right next to whatever you're commenting on. All right, so first thing I do in every dashboard now is I create a documentation dashboard. That looks like this. All it is a dashboard in Tableau, and it's pretty simple. It has a header that lists what the workbook is, when it was created, my name. There's a little change log. So if there's significant enhancements, I put some, who is in charge of the enhancements. Data source notes, usually things like understand the grain of this data, or this is a flat file, and here's the department that's responsible for it. And finally, anything else that I think is going to trip people up or that they should know. Like, for example, this workbook today is based on Superstore sales. If you happen to have formal documentation, a wiki, a share drive, put it here as well. Nice thing about this, by the way, is you can make this a template and just copy and paste it into a blank workbook. It doesn't have any data sources, so I usually just have a template workbook, copy paste it into every new workbook I create. Second tip and trick, in dashboards, you can use a hidden note. Again, I learned this a few years ago, so if you know who created this tip, please let me know because I want to thank her. But this is a really cool one. If you've got a dashboard like this, I think this is going to render for just a second. You can actually add a hidden note that only the developer sees that is outside of the area of the dashboard. So when this renders, this will show up in Tableau server. This will not be visible. And the way that you create that is you take a text box, and I'm holding down Shift. You just drag it out so it's floating. Type your note, this, is a note. And then on the layout tab, so this is a 1000 pixel wide dashboard. You can go to layout and change the X to be slightly bigger than that, like 1025. And this note will then be outside of the area of the screen. You know, you can put several things in it. You can make it red around the border. It's a nice handy trick. I recommend you put it over on the right, not down below, because if your screen's a little smaller, you actually won't be able to scroll down to here. All right. If you're in a worksheet, you can actually use the caption. So I don't see a lot of people use captions very much in Tableau. It's actually visible here. You can show the caption, and usually it creates some kind of generic text that nobody really ever uses. So instead, you can use this in a dashboard or in a worksheet instead. You can, well, I'm going to move this out of the way. There we go. You go to worksheet, show caption. You can write your note here. This is a note. And then you can actually drag it up here. And this has no effect on what's shown in the front end. It's only visible on this sheet. So this is really helpful if there's something funky going on, you know, if you built some complicated viz, especially if you needed to use a blog post to build this viz, you can put the blog right in here and link to it. In terms of worksheets, or sorry, in terms of dashboards, I really like to put notes if there's parameter actions that aren't really obvious, if you've got hidden sheets that aren't necessarily obvious, it's really nice to put them right here. Calculations. If you are using workbooks for a while, you will probably have a bunch of gnarly calculations. I had a client recently where I had to adjust things for daylight saving time. Daylight saving time starts the second Sunday in March, which is a pretty complicated calculation for me to figure out. It wound up being this very long thing. And if you put it on one line, it becomes much too long. It's much wider than the calculation box. But at the same time, if you parse it, you can put a million spaces in it. Oftentimes there's tools online that will do this for you, and it's a little bit of an overkill. I'll note for those of you who are beginners, Tableau will let you put as much white space in there as you want. So as many carriage returns as you want, you can put it in there. I usually try to just organize it into like a logical chunk. So for example, I can see this is a big make date, which makes a new date. So I'll put that on top. It takes 3 arguments. So I kind of put the year first on its own line, month second, that's 3 for March. And the day is a sort of complicated thing that I've split into a few different lines. So you can probably guess where I'm going with this, which is that you should put some comments in there too. As a reminder, Tableau now has 2 ways to comment. One is to use 2 slashes, and the other is /* versus //. So this is kind of more familiar to those of you who are SQL or I think Python programmers. So this is what it might look like if it's commented. A lot of times you'll put a comment up top that explains what this calculation is. So for example, I've called it DST. That's an abbreviation. Not everybody will know what DST means. So I've explained it's daylight saving time. It's the second Sunday in March. And then with inline comments, it can either be the entire line or you can put it immediately after on the same line. So, I've got year coming right after the year formula, month is hard code. And then I've got sort of multiple lines explaining how the day gets calculated. So this next one is experimental, but you've already heard about ChatGPT earlier today. This is a fun one. I have seen people start to use ChatGPT to create their comments for SQL code and for Python code, and you can give it a spin for Tableau code. Use at your own risk. It's very exciting, but think of ChatGPT or Bard, or there's a new one that Simona told me about today called Claude, I want to say. Think of it as a really talented intern who's read all the books, but doesn't necessarily always get it. Make sure that you check what gets out, because I've had it misunderstand. I've had it actually change my code sometimes. So, but that said, do start using it, try it out, because I think these tools in the next year or two are going to get really good. And the way you do it is just prime it, tell it, please act as a Tableau expert, explain what you're doing. I'm trying to calculate the start of daylight saving time. Can you please clean it up and comment it? And it will tell you, certainly I can, because it's super helpful, and give you its version. Down at the bottom, it has a little button that says regenerate. Sometimes you have to click that a few times. It's exciting. I have had it work. I have had it not work. So try it out. Your results may vary. All right. Here's my opinion about what deserves a comment. If the purpose of the field isn't obvious, if you use an abbreviation, just explain what the field's doing. If somebody who's new to the company, she's hired last month, wouldn't necessarily know what the business rule is, just put it in the comments. If you see a hard code, if there's a number written down, if there's a date written down, explain why it's there. If like I have February 6th in my calculation, explain why it's February 6th. As you saw in the last one, if the logic's complicated, explain what it's doing. If there's assumptions or limitations, sometimes your data has changed. Oh, this only works after a certain date. Explain what that is. And finally, technical reference. If it came from a blog post, put it in a comment so other people can find it. All right, I'm going to switch, do some tips and tricks for workflow. So these are really to help you out and save you time as you develop. First one, name your fields effectively. I've seen people with different systems for naming their fields. I don't endorse a particular one. The one thing I do suggest you do is name for search and autocomplete. I use this search box constantly. I love it. So you can pop over to a worksheet. Anything that is calculating returns, I include the word return there so I can find it. By the way, on the search box, this was added a few years ago, but you can actually type return and then search for, say, dimensions. This is this little filter here. So you can filter to just dimensions called return. So that's a cool one. Get the length of the name right. So there's kind of a default size of this data box over here, and you can make it wider, or you can make it narrower. But every worksheet, it's kind of set at this sort of default size. So sometimes it can be a little too small. If you name, for example, RET instead of return, then it won't show up if you type the word return. So that's maybe a little too small. This one gets cut off if you really can't tell the difference between these two. So, this is an example where, I've got the word return in there. I can tell one's 180 days, one's 90 days. That's about right for me. It's an art, not a science. And finally, I do name parameters with the word param, and that's mostly because when you're doing autocomplete, you can't always tell what's the parameter until you press tab and then it turns purple. So putting the word param there just saves me a little bit of frustration. If you got multiple steps, name your fields the same. If I've got a 2-step field, I usually put prep if I have to create that before this one. If I got 3 or 4 steps, one way to do it is just to number them with a number and an underscore. By the way, I also like to put in parentheses afterward what every step is doing. Set default formatting. So, if every time you drag a field onto your view and it's a percentage and you have to go into format, change the percentage and take off the percent signs, or it's dollars and cents and you're constantly having to take off the pennies. Set the default formatting. By the way, you can do some other cool tricks. You can replace zeros with blanks, or you can replace zeros with dashes. But a couple of cool options for these. If, for example, you have a bunch of rates, if you name them all intelligently, they've all got the word rate in there. You can actually multi-select here. You multi-select all your rates and then go to default property number format and just fix them all at one time. This is handy for before you publish out your dashboard to get everything consistent. So, all percentage with 0. Or if you're creating a bunch of fields and I'm going to create another rate field, you can go into one that's already been formatted pretty, duplicate it, and then this will save the formatting. So a lot of times if I know I'm creating 5 or 6 in a row, I set up the first one, I set it up with the right formatting, and then I duplicate it and change it. Get your filters in order. This is only for blue filters. I'll talk about that in a minute. But a lot of times if you have a workbook with dozens of worksheets and you're QAing it and you want to make sure, did I apply the right filters everywhere? Do I have it all set on the date filter? Do I have it all set on the region filter? You can actually drag and drop these blue filters. So I usually do order them, let's say high level things like the date first and mid level things like the region. And then maybe underneath that, things that are specific to that particular workbook and the actions. This is just helpful because then when you're QAing, you can kind of go sheet to sheet to sheet and make sure they're all getting set the same way. A few caveats, this only works with blue filters, non-context filters. You cannot move the gray ones around. And it does not have any effect on calculation. So you're not changing how this viz calculates. That's all handled by Tableau's order of operations. Untangling worksheets. So if you have a million worksheets, especially, later on you'll hide them, but I tend to not leave things hidden while I'm developing. Just color them. I do that a lot. So, this is the overview dashboard. And if I unhide everything, you'll see that's all blue. These are all red. These are all yellow, etc. So Tableau only gives you a certain number of colors here under color, but usually by 7 or 8 dashboards, you've pretty much colored everything you need. And it's handy because if you have a lot, it just makes sure that you're doing the right version for the right dashboard. I do encourage you to use developer-friendly sheet names. Sometimes these sheet names can get pretty long. If you're hiding your worksheets, the users aren't going to see these anyway. It's a little hard for me to see that the map is called profitability by geography. It's kind of a long name. Geography is the second word. If the user's not going to see it, I call it something really simple, honestly. Usually the name of the type of visualization. So if it's bands or KPIs, I'll call it bands. If it's a map, I put the word map in there. If it's here you've got 2 area charts, area segment, area profit. It just makes it easier. If you're a new user, you may not necessarily know about what I call the waffle. It's the sheet sorter in Tableau. So down here at the lower right, you got 3 options for looking at your sheets. It kind of defaults to this Excel looking version. But the second option here is, like you just saw, little thumbnails, and these are much shorter. It doesn't show quite as much of the name. And this is what's called the sheet sorter, and I call it the waffle. This is handy because you can rearrange your dashboards, you can drag and drop. You can rename things right here. So this is handy for just getting your workbook in order. All right, a couple of tips and tricks for dashboards. In Tableau, there's kind of 2 schools of thought. One is team containers and the other is team float. In my professional work, I tend to be team container. In my personal work, a lot of times I'm team float. You've heard this from a lot of people. If you're team container, take a piece of paper out and just sketch it out beforehand. The key being, as you build containers, they can be, especially say this middle one, containers, and it helps to kind of know, okay, to get the map next to my filters, I got to make a horizontal and then I got to make a vertical, etc. Avoid the dreaded tiled layout. Tiled layout's okay if you're building something simple, but it makes it really difficult necessarily to get things in the right container sometimes, or to really control the heights and widths of things. This is another great tip. Again, please let me know if you remember who invented this. You can actually avoid creating tiled containers at all, which I love. So if I start a new dashboard, you can actually take a vertical container and so I'm dragging it in with the shift button and making it floating. You can go to your layout and put it at the top left, 0, 0, and make it the same size as your dashboard, 1000 by 800. And now everything that I put in here will be in containers and it will not create any tiles at all. So, as I drag in a text box, it'll be like that. And another text box will go right under it. And a horizontal container can go under that. And if text goes in the horizontal container. It's really great. It does avoid creating tiles. So I like that. And finally, name your containers, especially the big ones. You don't have to name everything, but I do usually name the vertical and horizontals. That's mostly because if you're in Tableau, sometimes you wind up, the way to get the container that holds it is to double click this gray bar, and you're like double click, and now I'm with the right one. Sometimes it's 7 or 8 double clicks before you get to the right thing. So I do usually suggest coming in here to the layout tab and labeling, your big primary container, or this is a big horizontal, or this is a vertical. And it just helps to get you to exactly where you want to go. If your team float, my big advice is to name and order the floating objects. Tableau doesn't give things pretty names automatically. So like if I've created 4 different info buttons, it's kind of nice to remind yourself which info button is which, just rename it. And I do usually order them in the same top to bottom, left to right F-shaped pattern. The main reason for that is if you resize your dashboard, you decide you need an extra 400 pixels at the bottom, Tableau resizes all the floating objects, it shifts things around, and so this helps you go back and actually make them the size and position you want. Now, the one caveat to this is, while you can actually go in here and drag and drop these buttons, these things that are floating, so you can drag and drop them, it does affect the order in which they are layered. So you cannot always get them perfectly pretty, the way that an F reading pattern would be. Sometimes you got to double check and make sure you didn't put something behind something else and broke the functionality. The Fluorledge twins shared this recently. When you create dashboard actions, if you've got a really multifunctional dashboard, it's doing several different things. Tableau doesn't name these dashboard actions pretty, so just go in, give them names so that you make sure if you change something, you get the right action. And one final tip, there is no future me hates me event worse than spending a month on a dashboard and publishing it and having a user write to you and say, you have a typo in your title. The truth is, I'm a good speller, and I look at things, and you look at things for weeks on end and do not notice typos. So Tableau still does not have spell check. I really do go through and copy and paste everything into Microsoft Word, all the titles, all the help text, all the instructions, etc. Please go out to the forums, continue to vote on this. I know one day Tableau or the gods of Salesforce will actually implement it. Oh, okay. Hold on, say that a trip again. Grammarly? Interesting. Okay. I will have to try that. All right, so quick recap. If you find yourself doing the same things over and over again, if you're getting confused about where sheets are or where your calcs are, if you're fighting with your dashboards, just pull out the tip and trick, and future you will thank you. So. Thanks a lot. Do look us up on bksgconsulting.com. If you have other tips and tricks, other points of view, because these are my very personal points of view, please let me know. Shout them out now if you have a couple of minutes. But yeah, if there are questions or other ideas, please let me know. Yeah. I haven't used the data guide.
I wish it was rich text, but it kind of feels like a step back. You have it plain text over on the side, and the worksheets that you have to show up in the data guide, so then you have to think through the name of your stuff more. And it's helpful and takes some things away at the same time.
I'll have to look at it.
progress, but I found it challenging to use.
I'll have to take a look at it. Yeah, naming your sheets can be funky, especially because you don't always realize it. But when you name your dashboard, for example, one of the things I noticed is it puts that up in the URL. So sometimes if you name your dashboard sales dashboard test, that will be in your URL forever. So other comments, other tips and tricks, questions?
I guess a tip with containers. You show me when you're putting a container in the container, if you color them in different colors, then you can kind of keep track of them before
Yeah.
they have actual stuff.
That's a really good one. Yeah, that's because you can color them to guide yourself and then take them away later. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Putting things that were already on Casper. That really annoying little bit at the bottom on each side.
Yeah.
Take that bit off the dashboard, drag it back on its in. Take up a little bit.
If you actually throw two blanks on there, you can start adding things in between them. They're not like at the bottom wrong side, like crap, I meant for it to go in this other container.
Oh, I've never done that before. Oh, you put it in the blank sandwich. Oh, I'm gonna take that one. Yeah. Yeah, I originally was going to talk about that and I took it out, but that default comment on a field I find is really useful if you have weird like especially data values, because it can work on fields that aren't calculations. So if 98 means don't know, it's handy to put in. So that's another good default. Oh yeah. Oh, so anything that touches a parameter, they'll put like hashtag sales param. Ah, that's excellent. All right. Well, thank you all. And come say hi afterwards and look me up on Facebook. Oh my God, I said Facebook. LinkedIn.
Thank you. So good. Thank you. So thanks to Branden, thanks to Jeremy and Ace. All good stuff today. Thanks everyone for coming.